Hi people, it's Sarkovist here, and today I'm going to be talking about Double Fine's latest game, and that is PsychoNauts 2, and what a treat this game was. I've been watching this title with some sort of nervous excitement, like I'm a big fan of 3D platformers. When I started getting into gaming a long time ago, back on the PS2 and the GameCube and the original Xbox, there was almost like an oversaturation of this sort of game, to the point where the original Psychonauts completely passed me by. I never played it, and I was only aware of it years later. Like, when I was in that time period, I didn't even know the game existed. And it was only this year when people started talking about Psychonauts 2 that I decided to play the original Psychonauts on my Xbox in back compat. And it was quite fun, but to be fair, it was also quite dated. So I was thinking, am I going to really enjoy Psychonauts 2? As much as I liked the atmosphere and the creativity of that original game, I think I just played it at the point where naturally the fact it's over a decade old is going to be quite clear. But I can say right now to anyone who's played the original, if you like the original, you're going to love Psychonauts 2. And I think even if you weren't super drawn in by it, I think you'll still very much like it, because I see this as a massive upgrade on the original in really every conceivable way. And what really struck me about this game was actually the story. And I have no intention to spoil what the story here is. All I'll really say is that it follows on from, I think it was the Rhombus of Ruin, which I had to just look up on YouTube just to get the general context for it, which was a VR game, which itself was a direct successor to the original Psychonauts. But in terms of like the game's chronology, all of the events are within days of each other, and they even make some jokes about that in the game, where they're talking about one of the villains from the first game who's now reformed, but that's only within a matter of days within the context of the franchise. And I just tell you what, guys, like, this is such a witty game. Like, it's not gonna necessarily like have you on your back laughing. I can't say there are too many games, really any games, that do that for me, where I'm finding them just absolutely hysterical. But the way the characters are written, it's just so sharp. Like, you always got a little smile on your face when you're playing it, just thinking, oh, that's quite clever, oh, that's quite good. You know, just that knowing feeling. It might even be that if you were playing with a group of people, maybe then you'd have a bit of a laugh, but it's just constantly witty throughout, and I really enjoyed it. And the thing about the narrative, like the plot, is if I were to attempt to give you a synopsis of it, you'd think it was quite convoluted and didn't sound particularly interesting. No, that's the wrong way to say it. Just too much. Like, it might sound too busy and too, twisty and turny. But when you're actually playing the game, they deliver it in a really great, engaging fashion. And yeah, I think in terms of the story, it's some of the most fun and the most entertained I've been in a long time. The characters are great. The voice acting's all just on point. Like, that witty writing is accompanied by these voice actors who they get the nuance of the script. Like, they just absolutely nailed it. And I can't even compare it. I can't think of another game that gets, just that wit, that sharpness in the way that this game does. And just in case you're looking at the visuals and thinking, oh, but you mean, but for a childish point of view. Well, although it's a very clean game, like there's no swearing or anything like that, I think you can appreciate it regardless of your age, right? Like, I'm 25, but I felt very engaged by the humor in the game. So yeah, it's one of its high points. But that's not to say that the gameplay isn't any good too. It certainly is. I would say that this is dominantly a platformer. You spend most of your time doing that, but there is combat as well. And the platforming feels, I don't want to say it feels ultra precise to the level of like a Mario game, but it is very good. It doesn't feel janky, it doesn't feel unpolished. There are just a few odd moments where maybe your character Rasputin does the wrong thing. But overall, it is very good and it's very solid. One thing that originally worried me was when I started playing it, you'll notice the walking speed is very slow, but you quickly gain this ability called levitation, which allows you to run on this psychic ball, and it massively speeds you up and actually turns the act of moving from being a little bit slow to actually being really fast and fun. Like, levitation, for me, is what changes the perspective of how I looked at the platforming in this game. And the thing is about this particular power is you're not often forced to use it, and I can really imagine someone's take on this game being different depending on how much they use the levitation power. But just to talk about this, right, the psychic elements of this game is you are a psychonaut, a spy who can enter people's minds and has these various mind powers, like, as I say, the levitation. You can shoot blasts out of your mind. You can use telekinesis, the classic. But the game hinges around the fact that you can enter other people's minds. And when you go in there, you see the world in their kind of perspective and their viewpoint, which opens the game up to have such immensely creative world design. One of the first minds you go into is like a mad dentist room, like there's teeth everywhere, there's like sinks and utensils, like it's really sinister looking. But then you might go to another world and it's like ultra psychedelic because the character is very optimistic and very fun loving and is driven very much by the senses. And the thing about this game is it does delve into some sort of mental health topics, but never in a way that I think is too ham-fisted or overly serious. I think it just looks at various flaws or aspects of the human psyche and just decides to be creative with them. Some of the enemies, for example, one of the enemies is literally called a panic attack, and it's this really fast, jumpy enemy that's really hard to take out. And I thought, oh yeah, it's quite a creative take on that. And I don't see anyone really being offended by it because it's not trying to make light of any of this. It's just trying to create a metaphor, an allegory for these different aspects. So if anything, if you suffer from any of the issues that are presented in this game, I would actually wager you will feel like it's an element of catharsis rather than anything that's trying to make light of anything. It's very clever in that way, because the game, like I say, it's a very clean game. The humour is very clean, but it's very light-hearted. It never really feels like it's being offensive to its subject matter, which is excellent. But yeah, diving back to the gameplay. So the platforming is pretty much solid, very good. The combat, it's not perfect. I wouldn't say it's as tactile as I would like. Maybe I could get a bit more responsiveness in the controller, for example. When I take down an enemy, feel more like I'm really hitting them. But what I do like about the combat is that it gives you all these psychic abilities, all these psychic powers, and it does, as you go up against more challenging engagements, force you to really use all of them, or a lot of them, in order to use the most effective tactics on enemies. You could just use like the basic side blast on a lot of these enemies, and you would actually be able to take them down, but after a very long time. But fun tactics like stealing some enemies' weapons with your telekinesis and throwing back at them, or using levitation to move around the battlefield quickly so you're hard to hit, but while still using your other powers in tandem. There's a lot of room for creativity there. And so the combat, it's not the game's, I don't think it's greatest strength, but at the same time, it is actually quite unique. So I certainly wouldn't say it's a detractor from the experience. It's just not its main focus, which is completely fine. But I did enjoy it. And the levels are littered with all these little collectibles that are also kind of worked into the theme of going into the minds of your, I was going to say enemies, but a lot of the time they're not your enemies. They're just people you go into the minds of. Things like figments of your imagination, which are these little squiggly drawings you collect, or emotional baggage, where you have to collect like a tag for these bags you find, and if you get rid of all of them, you're technically relieving the person of their emotional baggage. Or these half a mind collectibles, there's all sorts of things you can collect and find in their minds, and that's, I guess, where I'm at with the game right now, because I've completed the main story, a lot of the side missions, which unfortunately didn't take me too long. So now I'm just going back through the mind, and looking at all the little areas I can get to, because some of the areas you can't reach when you first see them until you unlock some of the later side powers. But then there's one thing I have to say about this game, is it's not super long. I think I beat the game in maybe 12 hours. So what I would just give as a piece of advice is don't rush this game. Just try and explore as many hidden areas as you can. Try and take it all in, because if you just go straight through it, as tempting as it can be with the really interesting narrative, it is unfortunately over all too quickly. I think it's just one of those things you have to accept with games like this, where it's consistently quality and consistently entertaining. The payoff is it can't go on for that long, because it can't keep it up. And it's why, even though I have to say, yes, it is a little bit of a short game, at the same time, like, I don't want all games to be like Game of a Service, where the fun is dragged out over such a sort of wide time period that the minute to minute isn't that fun anymore. It's more just the overall. But in a game like this, it's very concentrated fun. Like, every moment is designed to entertain you, and that's what it does extremely well. And I think why I feel very sort of encouraged by this game is I was concerned that, well, platformers, they're getting a bit old, and that if I was to play something like this now, I'd be let down and disappointed by it. I'd be thinking, oh, it's this isn't a genre that holds up today. But, well, Double Fine, they've evolved the genre from where it used to be, and it is incredibly fun today. It doesn't feel dated at all. In fact, I'd say it's really good. So moving on to the graphics of the game, well, they speak for themselves largely, and it's got this fantastic, unique art style. And I guess the closest thing I can think to compare it to is something like Tim Burton's Corpse Bride. It's the closest thing I can think to compare it to, but it really is its own thing. Like, that isn't a perfect comparison. It's very unique. It's quite simplistic, but in a way that works for it. And it's also going for like this ultra crooked look where it wants to avoid too many straight, perfect angular lines. And it gives it, this really interesting, unique aesthetic. I played the game on the Xbox Series X and it looks very sharp on there as well. 4K at 60 FPS. There is a 120 FPS mode. Unfortunately, I don't yet have a 120 FPS screen, so I couldn't experience, but honestly, 4K 60 is perfectly good enough for me, and I'm sure it's perfectly good enough for a lot of people. However, if I was going to play it on another system that was maybe, let's say, 1080p or 1440 or whatever, I think it'll be fine because the art style is quite simplistic. While 4K is a nice bonus, it's far from required to fully appreciate the way this game looks. If I'm being real with myself, 1080p for this game is like 100% fine because of the slightly simplistic look. So if you're playing it on an older system, or I believe the situation with PlayStation right now is that you can play it on like PS5, for example, but it's the PS4 version. But I wouldn't be at all disheartened by that because it's nice to have the resolution boost, but not essential to enjoy the experience by any stretch of the imagination. So graphically, a big thumbs up, and yeah, I'd love to see another game in this sort of style from these guys. And yeah, I traditionally I'd move on to Lasting Appeal, but like I say, unfortunately, beyond just sort of going into the mines where you've been before and looking for the collectibles and doing some of the final side missions, there isn't a tremendous amount to keep you coming back for hours and hours and hours. So if you are purchasing this game, do know that it's like a concentrated burst of fun. It's not necessarily something that's going to last you a long time to play. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just what this kind of game is. And if anything, we're having too many games, I think, that do the opposite, where they aren't concentrated fun. They're very spread out fun. And they last you a long time, but they're not the most memorable experiences. So I'm glad we have a game like this. And what I really, really hope is that this game just, it just sells well, or I guess does well on Game Pass. However, that's realistically measured, right? Because I want to see more of this, and I don't just mean more of Psychonauts. I want to see more platformers, because what Double Fine and also Insomniac, of course, earlier in the year, Ratchet and Clank have shown me is that platformers don't have to be gone. They are still a lot of fun. The genre has room to grow, and it's a fantastic breeding ground for creativity. So yeah, this was an absolute triumph, and I think when it comes to the end of the year and people are talking about what is game of the year, like, I'm not saying Psychonauts 2 is going to run away with it. I never say that, until we actually get to the end of the year, but it really should be in those talks for some people when we're discussing, platformers or writing or narrative. I can't recommend this game enough. So, as always, people, thanks very much for watching, and see you next time.